Thank you, Maggie. Yes, Scanning the Horizon. I must admit, when I agreed to that title, I either didn't know that there was going to be a futurist opening the session, or I wasn't clear that they were going to be presenting such a clear, compelling picture of that horizon, and a rather provocative picture as well, I guess. So, in a sense, that's a good thing, because it means that I don't need to paint that picture. So instead, what I'm going to try to do is to tie everything else we've been talking about in terms of all the technologies and the opportunity that provides for innovation to supporting that picture, to helping us move towards that horizon, obviously with a major focus around all the digital technologies and what that means in terms of digital business, digital HR, digital reward. Just a couple of things in terms of the introduction. If nothing else, just to try and give you a little bit of confidence that I hopefully know what I'm talking about. You'll make your own minds up about that. But I have worked for major global HR and reward consultancies. I've been a co-author with Dave Ulrich. I've written a couple of book chapters around reward innovation. My own book, The Social Organisation, touches on this agenda as well. So, this is a slide that I developed about 5 years ago. And so it is out of date, and I'll explain why I'm using it in a second. But sort of 5 years ago, we were approaching, I think, the end of that first phase of disruption around technology. All of these SMAC technologies, social media, mobile, analytics, cloud, were fairly well established in leading firms at least. And I'd been, absolutely, I'd been blogging and using other social media tools myself and working on social HR projects. And it sort of seemed to me for a while, about 5 years ago, that we'd sort of been through that major transformation. And some organisations were still sort of quite a way behind some of the leaders, and some areas of HR were clearly behind other areas. We'd already seen huge transformation in areas like recruiting, internal communications, learning and development. But other areas like performance management had only just really started. It was clear that we were starting, there was a huge transformation approaching, just the number of organisations which were starting to transform performance management. But it was clearly some way behind. And I must admit, for a period of time, I did sort of think that we'd got through that huge transformation and life was going to be a little bit easier again. And then it was sort of about a year, 2 years later that it started to become clear what AI and apps and all of the wearables and other digital technologies were going to have an even more profound disruption that we'd been through. Now, two things firstly about this slide before I explain why I'm doing it. Firstly, just to apologise, because this slide is purely qualitative and subjective, and obviously in today's analytical age, I should really be presenting you data-based evidence, and it's not, so hands up. Secondly, because it is 5 years old, it doesn't involve anything in terms of digital technology that we're going to be talking about today. And I think all of these areas are now shooting upwards again, hugely exponentially, because of what digital can do. But the reason for showing you the slide is my suggestion, even 5 years ago, it was quite clear that reward just wasn't keeping up. Sorry, because I know most of you are reward practitioners, but you look at the transformation that's been going on in other areas of HR, reward, not so much. There have clearly been areas, recognition, for example, the strategic social recognition transformed completely in the last 10 years. But the core basis of what we do in HR, in reward, still fundamentally what we were doing 10, 20 years ago. In fact, 20 years ago, we started talking about this thing called the new pay. But nothing really changed. There was a wonderful article in the World at Work journal about 10 years ago on the new pay, saying that because the new pay was the same as the old, we needed sort of new. And that ended up being just the same as the old as well. And I'm not going to suggest we need the new pay, because that would be, frankly, ridiculous. But, I'm absolutely convinced we do still need more transformation in this space. And therefore, it's certainly not a surprise to me that we get results like this, which hopefully you've seen from Burson, Deloitte, suggesting that satisfaction in reward is, on the floor, below the floor. I think that's the clearest statement from a big consultancy that we've got work to do. But it really shouldn't be a surprise, I don't think. And indeed, this morning in our introductory session, we had that, I think, was it the very first slide or the second slide about the increasing importance of human values. You really start to think about that and think about how we can build more people-centric organisations. And a lot of what we do in reward, really doesn't fit the bill. Variable bonus payments. Well, firstly, generally don't work anyway, according to most research. And secondly, even if they do, reinforce selfish and destroy pro-social behaviour. That's not about human values. If we want human values, we need to start thinking about rewarding in a very different way. And all of that is without any of this disruption that's coming at us from digital HR. So this is my slide to try to explain what I think digital HR is about. Because clearly digital HR is about using digital technologies. So hopefully you've talked to all of the vendors outside. They're all amazing technologies that are substantially transforming what we're capable of doing. And digital HR, digital reward, isn't simply about those technologies. We're always going to achieve more by shifting the way we're supporting our businesses that we operate within than we are simply by improving the way that we work internally inside HR and reward. So the biggest aspect of digital HR is about digital business. And digital business is obviously about using digital technology as well, but it's also much more than that. The quote this morning was Steve Jobs saying something like, if you use new technologies to automate old ways of doing things, you just end up with a bigger problem than you start with. We need to change the problem. We need to change the way that business is being run. So digital business is about new business models, getting close to the customer, working much more closely with partners and developing broader ecosystems. And then obviously the other big part of that is as soon as we use digital technology and we move what had happened previously in face-to-face interactions into the technology produces lots of exhaust data as a byproduct, as a supplementary benefit, and then we can do lots of analytics on that data. So that's sort of what digital business is about to me. And then you've got very similar trends going on in the workforce. So the equivalent of getting closer to customers in the business side, on the workforce side, is about wanting interactions to get closer to us. So that's why things like personalization, which I know has been discussed in lots and lots of different sessions, is no longer just nice to have, but is becoming absolutely essential within our reward agendas. Communicating the value of reward was another big issue that we talked about earlier on. Absolutely, but we need to communicate the value in the terms of the individuals we're communicating to. And then in the middle, digital HR, digital organization, to me, is how do we change things to respond to both of those two shifts? How do we support the digital businesses that we're working in, and how do we do that by engaging our digital workforce? So once again, that is about using digital technologies, but it's much more than that as well. It's about the equivalent of new business models is about new organization models, new ways of organizing people, getting closer to our employees, really focusing on the employee experience, developing internal ecosystems or networks, and once again, using data and analytics. Absolutely. So that's the context. That's why digital HR is so important. It's not just about using digital to do things better, albeit that's important. It's about shifting the ways of working towards that new environment where absolutely human values are key. Collaborative communities, I think that was the third slide this morning, are so important. So in fact, out of all the different shifts that digital is introducing, to me it is about these new organization models. That's the most important thing. thinking about the way that we organise our people and using different approaches, not just managing everybody through functions and divisions, but thinking about the use of project teams, of communities, of networks. And because I've only got 20 minutes, that doesn't even touch on digital gig working platforms or the use of blockchain that we talked about this morning for digital autonomous organizations. And each of these different types of organizing people introduces huge changes to the way that we need to reward people too. So new organization models, and primarily about more focus on groups. This is partly a consequence of digital, but it's a deeper change as well. Increasingly, our businesses focus on developing specialists. In reward, many of you will be reward specialists. Some of you will be specialists in reward technology or reward modeling or well-being platforms or whatever it may be, because there's so much knowledge and potential and disruption going on in each different area. To stay on top of it, you need deeper and deeper specialism. But at the same time, the problems facing us in the world and business are becoming bigger and deeper and murkier and more complex and cross-disciplinary. And you've got that challenge about how do deep specialists respond appropriately in an increasingly complex world. And the way that most organizations respond to that is to pull specialists together into cross-disciplinary teams. That's why most of us spend most of our time these days in meetings, responding to emails, on the phone, because the work today is much more collaborative than it used to be. So whereas what mattered 10 years ago was human capital, the value of our people, these days it's much more about social capital, the value of the way that people work together, cooperate, collaborate, the value of teams, communities, and networks. So groups are much more important than they used to be. And we need to think much more smartly about how we use different groups, how we bring people together in different ways. As I was saying, including things like teams, communities, networks. Absolutely, it's why collaborative communities we were talking about this morning are so important. It's why systems like Workplace by Facebook, you're going to learn about next, are so important to today's business environment. And as soon as we start to organise differently, we need to reward people differently as well. Most of our reward approaches come from a traditional functional approach, which 10 years ago, when everything was lovely and stable and simple and happened within specialisms, giving people a base pay and a variable bonus made absolute perfect sense. As we get more and more people working on projects, communities, and networks, starts to get much less so. So firstly, how do we reward groups, not just teams, but all the different groups, rather than simply individuals? And a lot of what we do to reward individuals now doesn't work. Or if what matters is human capital, the value of your individuals, then giving people individual bonuses, well, I'd argue it doesn't work, but perhaps it could. If what matters is social capital, the value of groups, then paying people individual bonuses destroys the propensity to collaborate. Things like the huge pay differentials in our organisations today. We had a look at, we were asked to consider Andy Hornby's salary at HBOS this morning, weren't we? But that's nothing compared to Jeff Fairbairn's bonus at Persimmon, or who was it in the news today? Denise Coates at Bet365. I'm not arguing against paying people that much. I think it's stupid and bewildering, but anyway, if that's what they want to do, so fair enough. But from a social capital perspective, that destroys the social fabric of our organisation. From a human capital perspective, paying the best people a huge amount of money may make complete sense. From a social capital perspective, where what matters is cooperation and collaboration, it's stupid, it's a nightmare. The average pay differential between a FTSE chief executive and an average employee, according to the High Pay Centre, is 180 at the moment. The chances of an average employee being engaged in an organisation, it's not going to happen. So focusing on groups, focusing on social talent rather than individual talent. You know, the talent who help other people perform rather than simply focus on achieving their own objectives. Reducing pay differentials, increasing pay transparency. All of these things, so important in today's digital world. And there's so much opportunity to do things differently. This is one of the neatest examples, I think, that's been in social media recently. So a small organisation using a very social approach to pay, basically asking people how much does each individual deserve to be paid. Now, clearly there's a number of consequences and downsides associated with that, which I'm sure you can see. But what we're doing now doesn't necessarily work either. You know, so will it work? I don't know. I'm sure there'll be some difficulties with it, but it's possibly no worse than the traditional way of paying people. Let's have a go. Let's experiment. Let's see what other opportunities there can be. This is my suggestion for how it should work. Start with very clear objectives for what you're trying to achieve. Ideally, what are the outcomes you're trying to create in your people and organisation? And my suggestion, think about social capital rather than human capital when you do that. Be clear about your workforce needs. All of those technologies outside that help you get closer to your employees, understand their needs, and you know that's brilliant because the more data like that we can get, so much the better. Clear values or principles. Baker Hughes, one of their slides is about their reward principles, and brilliant. And too many organisations don't have clear principles, and if you don't have clear principles, how do you develop a best fit strategy and get away from all of that best practice and do what's right for you? Think creatively and laterally about how you should be rewarding people. Don't just remain blinkered to what we've done in the past. And then choose the solution you're going to use based upon which of those reward opportunities best fit your objectives in terms of the outcomes, the employee needs, and the principles. It's simple. Apply that framework, and you should, most of the time, end up in a very different way of rewarding than what you're currently doing.